My three favorite Bond movies are Goldfinger, License to Kill, and Skyfall. These three movies are pretty much perfect. I think James Bond's a very interesting character because he's extremely dynamic. I think that through James Bond, we can investigate masculinity through the years and how masculinity interacts with sex and gender and war, politics, um, the gray areas of morality, of murder, right, of heroism. And considering that James Bond often caters to the more impulsive desires of a masculine movie audience, I believe that the films can be more honest and more trustworthy when it comes to masculine identities throughout the years. And also how cinema interacts with masculinity as masculinity is interacting with world politics, geopolitical scenarios, war, and women. I think that's awesome. Goldfinger, I think, is a wonderfully made film. It's a lot of fun, wonderful pacing, wonderful style, wonderful effects. Shirley Eaton as Jill Masterson, painted in gold. I remember the first time I saw her. I remember that image. First time I ever saw that when I was a child, probably 5 or 6 years old. That stuck with me forever. And that was one of my first true glimpses of eroticism. And also that eroticism was hand in hand with murder and evil and masculinity. License to Kill is likely my favorite Bond movie. It's one of Timothy Dalton's Bonds. It shows us a hyper emotional Bond who is flirting with nihilism and courting ultra violence while he seeks revenge against a drug lord named Sanchez, played by Robert Davi. License to Kill has my favorite Bond girl, Talisa Soto, as Lupi Lamora. It's even a beautiful name. Bond women had wonderful names. Lupi, though, oh my god. Lupi's my dream girl. That's my Bond girl. And also through the Bond films, we can see what changes about beauty standards and also what stays the same, what changes about masculinity and what also stays the same, and the fears that are inside of masculinity. Like within License to Kill, we are applying some of the latent nihilism and anger that was felt from 80s men onto James Bond, and James Bond is having to combat a lot of the more intense feelings that were shared amongst men within the time period, grapple with some of the more intense feelings felt in 1989. License to Kill is also interesting from a cinematic perspective. I think that also, like, James Bond is so important, like, so significant and so interesting, and it makes him underrated, which is so strange because he's one of the most popular filmic characters of all time. Because you can track sexuality, you can track masculinity and feminine beauty standards, you can track cultural attitudes about war, about other countries, about geopolitical situations, geopolitics, right? But you can also track cinema, popular cinema, like Goldfinger is a wonderfully made piece of 60s cinema. It's like everything that was perfect about 60s blockbuster filmmaking encapsulated within Goldfinger. Same with License to Kill. License to Kill is a flawless example of late 80s and early 90s action films. Think Lethal Weapon, think Die Hard, think Scarface, think the Miami Vice television show, and you get that within James Bond. But all of those different elements, all those different titles and properties and like cultural signifiers, they get stronger within License to Kill because you are superimposing that onto James Bond, which has a kind of built-in mythos, or at least a built-in cinematic language. And if you build on top of it, slightly more nihilistic and certainly more ultra-violent action grammar, action vocabularies, if you build that on top of it, then James Bond takes on more complex and sophisticated and darker qualities, which is what happened with License to Kill. License to Kill is a beautiful film. I also think that Skyfall is a remarkable movie. And just like what I was saying previously, I think that Skyfall best encapsulates that 2010s cinematic landscape, cinematic grammar of the blockbuster. It's the best example of it. And I just rewatched it, and I didn't realize it until I rewatched it like just now that, oh my God, like this is 2010s. 2010s had its own ethos. 2010s had its own cultural attitude. 2010s had its own signature, and all of those elements are best represented within Skyfall. Skyfall plays into the tropes, plays into the concepts, plays into what was popular within blockbusters, popular action films of the 2010s. But since we are superimposing fresh tropes onto a pre-existing thing like James Bond, those tropes become so much more powerful, because like it's not just James Bond's not just a pre-existing thing. It's like a massively important thing that most of the movie going public is completely fluent in. Like we're all fluent in the language of a James Bond film. So by superimposing the new 2010s tropes onto Skyfall, those tropes become more powerful and James Bond becomes more verbose on account of that. Just to use one example, it does the trope where the bad guy wants to get caught. Like it's part of his master plan. We would see that within Loki and the Avengers and Joker in The Dark Knight. But I feel like Skyfall does it a lot better because it expresses the metaphorical or symbolic value of that with extreme clarity. Because instead of just going, oh, that's a trope, like it's so boring to recognize a trope. That's what's wrong with a lot of film critics. I am the best one. Because who cares about recognizing a trope? Anyone can recognize a trope, can point it out and go, it happened here and here and here and here. The point is to ask what the trope means. Like, why was it significant? Why did we see that trope so many times? Why did we see it everywhere? Why did that trope work? Right? So why did the villain deliberately getting captured so that he can go through with an even larger part of his completely psychotic master plan? Like, why did that trope work so well? It has to do with the internalized villainy that we felt within the 2010s. We felt something internalized. We were internalizing our less desirable qualities. We were internalizing the evil within us all. And if you look at Joker, if you look at Silva, if you look at Loki, if you look at the characters who deliberately got captured so they can go through their master plan, even like Moriarty on Sherlock, like everyone was doing this. Everyone was doing this. There is something that is undeniably captivating about each of these villains. Not simply manipulative or seductive, but almost politically powerful. Something that was anarchic, something that was liberating, right? And through the movie, since they do break out, right? Like since all of these villains break out because it was their goal to get arrested, we have a sort of hate internalized within us, and it's by liberating that where we can kind of start to live through the antagonist of the piece. I feel that the 2010s were far less interested in giving us heroes' journeys, but more like villain eras, which I think plays more into the time period and everything. I think that that's fascinating. And also within Skyfall, we can look at where masculinity was. I think that men were feeling increasingly more irrelevant. And certainly the James Bond film as a whole, like the grammar I was just waxing poetic over, was feeling more and more irrelevant, being critiqued out of history, out of existence. And James Bond is battling with that. And like what is the central force of Skyfall is James Bond protecting his maternal figure, protecting his feminine quality, protecting M, protecting his surrogate mother, who the surrogate mother within a Bond film, the head of like MI6, represents the state as well. So we're seeing how masculinity interacts with patriotism, the state, with childhood trauma, with trauma in general, and also hypersexuality within Skyfall, considering that Silva and Bond have a remarkable scene where they flirt with each other. And James Bond goes, "What makes you think this is my first time?" Javier Bardem is just incredible throughout the entirety of Skyfall. He's an incredible Bond villain. Something I don't like is that I feel like I am slowly turning into a James Bond villain. I mean, I'm deformed. I'm very smart. I'm also delusional. I think I'm well on my I have a stupid ass haircut. I think I'm well on my way to becoming a Bond villain. Like look at how I dress, dude. Like bro, I'm a James Bond villain in the making. Welcome. Welcome everybody. Villains are very important though, especially to Ian Fleming, the creator of Bond. He often said that he liked a villain to kind of mirror the hero. And within License to Kill, we can see that very clearly, where the whole premise behind License to Kill is that James Bond's license to kill was revoked. He was kind of kicked out of MI6, kind of kicked out of his empire. And Sanchez is an individual who believes in loyalty above all else, above even money. And what Bond does to Sanchez through the film is truly cruel. Not that Sanchez deserves any pity or mercy, but it is cruelty. Within License to Kill, Bond's greatest weapon is manipulation. Hell, the gadgets he receives from Q are practically useless, but they are symbolic and interesting, right? Because Q gives him a camera that has that can fire rounds, it has live ammunition inside of it, and of course that's saying something very large about the kind of lethal power that film can possess, but I'm getting off track there. But Bond, just like in Yojimbo by Kurosawa, or in the much better A Fistful of Dollars by Leone, two films that were cited as influences upon License to Kill by the creatives involved, he destroys Sanchez's empire from the inside by making him live in a state of constant paranoia, thinking that people are trying to get rid of him and destroy his empire. Like he can't trust anybody. And for someone who was so fixated on loyalty as the greatest of all virtues, Bond manipulating Sanchez into being so paranoid, into going into a sort of seemingly bipolar mania over what Bond has convinced Sanchez are crimes against loyalty within his empire. They both end up becoming separated from their empire. Now, Bond is literally separated from his empire as he's acting alone on this ultra-violent, selfish, nihilistic revenge journey. But Sanchez has been made by Bond, tricked by Bond into believing that he is alone within his own empire. And you do get the feeling from Davi's performance that there are emotional insecurities within Sanchez, but Bond certainly identifies those insecurities within Sanchez and tortures those insecurities, aggravates them until they take over Sanchez's brain and his behavior. And they are both men without an empire who seem to be the only ones who believe in loyalty, as Bond is trying to get revenge for Felix Leiter and his dead wife, while he believes no one else cares. And Sanchez is, of course, obsessed with loyalty within his cocaine drug empire. And yet they believe that they are the only two men who understand loyalty, and now they're going to destroy each other. Shout out to Benicio del Toro as Dario, an excellent henchman. Such a cool henchman. He always has this wild, fucking psychotic look in his eyes. He's so fabulous in License to Kill. And also, if we're talking about wonderful henchmen, Goldfinger, Oddjob, Harold Sakata, oh my god, you are amazing, dude. Oh my god, Oddjob was so incredible. I love Oddjob. It's one of the best fights in movie history. Bond versus Oddjob within Fort Knox. It's excellent. In Skyfall, we also get this mirrored idea that Ian Fleming was so interested within, as if the villain is the shadow archetype of the hero himself. And they make this incredibly obvious to understand. I love Silva's entrance within Skyfall. Might be the best villain entrance of all time. Him getting off the elevator and then slowly walking up to the frame as he's telling a tale of rats devouring each other, about how you can change the nature of rats, and ultimately how he and Bond are the last rats standing, and they will cannibalize each other. An old-fashioned hero and an old-fashioned villain, the two last archetypes in a ever-changing world that is totally unequipped to handle the cannibalism of cinema's rats. Silva is ultimately the worst thing that Bond could ever become. And if we are positioning within Skyfall, the agents, the double O's, are M's children. Like, they are orphans of the world, and they are now M's children. And M is a symbol of the state itself, of the government, of the state. And you look at Bond, and even M's final words are, "At least I got one thing right," or I did get something right, and it was you, Bond. But Silva is also an end result of the state. You can end up like Bond, who has his own slew of problems, but certainly a virtue and an undeniable heroism and bravery. And then you have Silva, who is savage, who is sadistic, who is cruel, who is completely psychopathic and deformed and hurt and full of rage and mania. And brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He is also a product of the state. He is a son of M and a brother to Bond. Do you see what I mean? Within James Bond, we can actually engage with masculine psychologies as they change through the decades, through the years, through the different eras, through all of the different kinds of Bonds. We can follow masculine psychologies and philosophies through time. It's extremely fun to interact with, and it's so fucking cool that all of these big ideas are perfectly and eloquently stated within these incredibly mainstream films. There's such a deepness to James Bond. These are my 3 favorite ones, but I like most of them. I'm so happy I decided to start rewatching them because, God, they are just perfect. And I missed Bond. I missed these characters. And I've kind of been away. I've kind of removed myself from a lot of the more hyper masculine films. And I think that Bond is probably the most guy you can get. Like, that they are the most guy movies possible. And they are so poetic too. Like, that doesn't mean they're not poetic. They are extremely poetic, and they are saying so much. Like, Javier Bardem Silva is a character that really disturbs me. And I think he disturbs me because of how much I like him, because of how wonderful Bardem's performance is, but also just how I love Silva's theatrical qualities, how I love his melodrama, how I love his flair for the dramatic, how I love everything that he does. He is so spectacle driven and minded. If we live in the society of the spectacle, then Silva, the villains of a James Bond film, they put on the mightiest spectacles of all. And you have to wrap that within Skyfall into the perfection of the psychology of the film itself, because the villain is here to agitate, aggravate, and challenge what is viewed by a lot of people to be a dying and nearly archaic filmic vocabulary, which is the hypermasculine Bond film. And Silva is here to terrorize all of the insecurities that have existed forever within James Bond. And if these insecurities exist within the James Bond film, then these insecurities have always existed within men. And that's what makes Silva such a terrifying villain. Because he is looking to the audience, he's looking to Bond himself, he's looking to the trappings, to the frameworks of the film, and he is going, I'm going to terrorize this. I'm going to attack it. And I'm going to cause a scene. I'm going to hurt you. That's what Silva is saying. Films like Goldfinger, License to Kill, and Skyfall, they incorporated different and more sophisticated qualities into the James Bond film. And by doing so, they expanded what the James Bond film could truly accomplish. They strengthened its vocabulary visually and emotionally and psychologically, and exposed the limitations that everyone knew existed within the Bond films. But by incorporating all of these different elements and challenging the film's psychology and the history, the emotional history of the character of James Bond himself, we are able to just nuke those limitations, explode the parameters, and kind of just transcend all of the different insecurities that I think are so obvious within most action films and most action film heroes. I think that Skyfall is so fucking good. I think Skyfall might do this the best. I think License to Kill is just such a charming film. It's wonderfully done. Skyfall is Sam Mendes' best film. It's his only good film, actually. It's the only film he made that was good, but like, you know, it was great. That was a fantastic job, Mr. Mendez. That was wonderful. Bond takes his mother, takes the state back to Skyfall, back to the origin of his trauma, what has made him so disenchanted and detached and cold-hearted, goes back to the source of his childhood trauma. And the film even takes on kind of fantasy qualities at that point. Like, how does this place still exist? You know, how is it still standing? How does it seem so remote? It takes on a fantasy sort of quality, and it's there that we are exploring the trauma, the dark, very dark and sad psychology of James Bond himself, which becomes invaded on by Silva, by this sinister force who wants to punish the trauma that he inflicted, because he experienced parental trauma as well, but it was inflicted upon him by the state, by M. And it ends in this chapel, in this church. Silva says, of course it would end here. And he actually wants to die with M. He is that psychotic. He's that insanely desperate. Just pathetically insane. I loved him. Because those moments in Bond films are holy. Those final battles between the hero and the villain. And also, the state is often seen as holy. M was often seen as holy. Espionage can often be seen as holy. And I know that M tries to justify the continued existence of the MI6 by saying that we actually live in a much more dangerous world than before. It's opaque. It's not transparent. Everyone has their reasons, right? Everyone. You cannot trust anyone. We have the state here with her two favorite sons, or at least her two most famous ones. One that she completely disappointed and devastated, and the other that has learned to love her unconditionally. And ultimately, it is masculinity's job to protect their mother figures, whatever figure that mother might possess, right? Whatever symbol of one's mother you may use, you must protect it against those who seek to terrorize it, and that's your internalized evil, right? So like, look at Silva as the internalized hatred and psychopathic nature of James Bond. That's his internalized psychopathic nature. And what men have to do is destroy that part of them, but not before you completely understand it, which is why it was so important that Bond went to Skyfall and engaged with his childhood trauma. Like, you have to go through that. But once you do, you can protect your mother in your heart, in your mind, from the thing that's even deeper inside of you, the internalized villain of yourself, your shadow archetype, from destroying it. That's incredible. And of course, that's what that's what the film is saying that all men do, right? Like that's so fucking good, man. That's so good. I love these films. I do love these films. They're very complex and they're very sophisticated, and they're so much fun. Come the fuck on. They're so much fun. I love all the stunts, all the set work. Some of the action's just so fucking cool. My jaw's just like, oh my god, dude. Like I'm just so impressed by some of the action here, especially within Skyfall, Goldfinger, and License to Kill. Like the action's so cool, so rewarding, so exciting. It's fucking rad, dude. It's so fucking rad. These films are radical. I love them. These are the three best Bond movies because I think that if you spend enough time with each of them, you'll be able to learn a lot about the psychology of cinema itself. About your own psychology if you're a guy, about a lot of different things. You know? I think they're wildly good, spectacular film series that I don't think a lot of people engage with wholeheartedly. There's so much to go into here. Like Skyfall, I'm so happy I watched it again. It blew my fucking mind just now. Oh my god, I needed that. I really needed that. It's exactly what I needed. Silva was exactly what I needed. Last rat standing. You finally murdered the villain that was buried inside of you. You finally defeated it. Maybe that's what makes Silva so interesting to me, so attractive to me, and also so kind of scary to me, because he does seem like a fantasy character, and seems like a monster, even like maybe because I feel I'm intimate with that, because these films do speak to guys, man, and I'm a guy, and like there is something like that inside of me, and maybe that's what scares me because Skyfall really diagnosed it correctly. Like it knew me, and it doesn't just know me; it knows a lot of different people. We have something bad inside of us, and honestly, how you defeat that is to work through your trauma, which is hard, which is kind of impossible. Silva's just incredible. Those are some of my thoughts on my 3 favorite Bond movies. Thank you for watching me.